Thanks so much, Walter. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniella Lowenberg, and I'm based at the California Digital Library at the University of California. I have a few different roles, including overseeing the product development for Dryad, but today I'm here in the capacity as leading the Make Data Count initiative, which is focused on the development of responsible research data assessment metrics. MDC is run as funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and we collaborate with DataCite, Crossref, CDL, DataOne, and Bibliometrics institutions. Next slide. So I was asked to focus on the current state of data citation, but I want to zoom out for a second to note that while we're all here gathered to talk about data because we see the value in management and sharing, and we want to credit and assess these efforts, we're not yet at a point where we have dependable and consistent evaluation systems. Next slide. So researchers are publishing their articles, preprints, data, software, et cetera, due to mandates like the new NIH one coming out, and as increasing disciplines embrace sharing. But as research supporting stakeholders, we want a way to access this information for compliance reasons, but also to understand the ROI of open data, the impact and reach of published data, to eventually have a credit and incentive system in place or a space to reward folks for publishing their data. And one big piece of this are data citations, but they may not be the only indicator that are used. As bibliometric studies ramp up to understand what proper metrics are for data, it's important to get moving on supporting data citation infrastructure. Next slide. So I only have 8 minutes to go through a topic that deserves an entire workshop. So instead of diving into the specifics, I want to try and frame the rationale for a way forward in a complicated space. Next slide. So this is data that DataCite pulled last week, and it doesn't properly represent all data citations that exist, but it represents what we can find right now. The top number shows the data citations that are declared by repositories to DataCite through their relation types and metadata. And the third row are data citations declared by publishers to Crossref. Clearly, there are millions of data citations that exist, but the number of them that are findable and declared are awfully low. These numbers are also lower than they should be because they're not accounting for biomedical non-DOI data sets, as well as citations that wouldn't be found without text mining. But I'm showing this slide not only to acknowledge the lack of participation, but to also point out how important it is for data citations to be accessible. For us to have open and scalable networks of citations and to understand how many citations exist so we can build on them for evaluation, we need to require consistency of approach immediately. For instance, supporting our open infrastructure dependencies like Crossref and DataCite. Next slide. So why aren't we there yet? Well, next slide. There seems to be an attitude of waiting until things are perfect for all use cases before jumping in. And this is combined with inconsistent approaches and guidance and practices for how to cite data and how citations are extracted for public consumption. And a lot of these reinvent the wheel approaches have really distracted us. And because of this, like on the prior slide when I showed with the numbers, there's just not enough publishers supporting data citations in consistent and findable ways. Next slide. So why is that? Well, data are difficult, and there's a lot of different approaches to get started. But there's also a tension of why publishers should prioritize this resourcing and retooling over other features and priorities at the journals. And we would be in the wrong to not mention that even if all publishers did what we're asking for right now, we would still need text mining resources to understand all citations that exist across the larger landscape. Think about government documents, larger cohort data sets, and other. So while data citations don't fully paint the picture of data set reuse, we can't even get fully the picture of data citations. Next slide. But the positive is these barriers do not need to be roadblocks. The complexity is not as limiting as it seems. We can take an iterative approach and we can start by emphasizing that data citation should be the goal instead of data availability statements that aren't machine readable or usable. Next slide. And so to move forward in the right direction and focus on taking action, we propose, let's prioritize adoption over perfection. Next slide. So we should all begin with what we can. For example, journals can cite data and reference lists. Journal publishing is going to continue to evolve, and these changes can be daunting and time-consuming, but it's important to do. And the notions of citations are not new to journals. They're well-positioned to accelerate this evolution. Funders can require persistent identifiers for data that are cited in grant reports and subsequent publications. There's, of course, complexities like various types of identifiers and relationships for data, provenance, large consortia data, dynamic data, and so on. But as the space evolves, so will our use cases, so will our technology, and so should we. So let's not wait to get started. Next slide. There's a theme in this space where discussions spiral into spawning new working groups repetitive of past work, and that sort of approach is inhibiting doing and making change. So we need to focus on building on existing open infrastructure and standards. We should also acknowledge we all have the same shared goals. We want to evaluate research data reuse, but that doesn't mean that we can jump the gun and refer to citations as credit or build faulty metrics leaning on what happened for journals without contextualization and a broad understanding of how data are reused across disciplines. Next slide. So this is a call to action for researchers and research supporting infrastructures to participate now. If we want to get to a state where we can reward researchers for doing what we've all been advocating and building for the last decades around open data, we need to prioritize and act now. Publishers should include citations to data sets and reference lists. Repositories can continue to declare relationships to articles and preprints and metadata. Funders and other institutional bodies can mandate data to be cited. We can support and rely on open infrastructure for reporting and aggregation. And researchers, promote and cite your and your colleagues' data. Next slide. Our infrastructure is going to continue to improve. Bibliometricians will help to identify proper evaluation indicators for data, understanding the contextualization of reuse. But we can't advance the conversation or have these metrics and evaluation systems in place without the broad community jumping in and taking action now. There's a clear enough path ahead, so let's focus on adoption. Next slide. So in closing, it's an exciting time and we can all play a part, so we should all get moving. I've called attention to the overarching fact here that it's complex, but the space is not as complex as it needs to be, and there is a way forward. So for more resources on the specifics of how to get involved, as I didn't get into those, or what best practices are, check out the resources. These slides will be made available. Check out the Make Data Count website where they're all listed, or get in touch. Thanks so much.